Hello and welcome back to Lisa Loves. And before I start the case today, let me apologise. If you can hear a lot of weird noise, it's a really stormy day out here and you can maybe hear the wind and rain on the window, so just to let you know, with a bit of noise in the background. So, today's case I actually wanted to bring to you after having watched a documentary on Amazon Prime about the case and just being so shocked and appalled by it. I wanted to find out more about it, and obviously then having done that I wanted to bring it to you. The documentary is called Goodnight Sugar Babe, The Killing of Vera Jo Reigel, and that's the story I'm going to talk to you about today. Now, as a warning, this is an upsetting case. The lady in question was 24, but she did have learning difficulties to the point that she was said to have the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. So this was a very vulnerable young woman. And as if you stay to listen, you will see the treatment that she went on to receive from people she was staying with was just nothing short of appalling, which would eventually lead to Vera's death. So 24-year-old Vera Jo Reigel lived in Findlay, Ohio. She lived with a lady called Sherry Brooks, who was not her mother, who was someone that took her in. Now, to tell the story properly, I need to go back to the beginning, to when Sherry Brooks was a child herself, to give you some context of the story I'm going to go into for you. So when Sherry Brooks was 4 years old, her and her 2 siblings were taken into care. This was because her father had sexually molested her. Her father gave her the nickname Sugar Babe. Now, she was 4 years old and she had been abused by her father for a long time. Now, what is very difficult to understand is that in adulthood growing up, that Sherry kept this nickname Sugar Babe and she seemed to like the nickname. And in the documentary she is interviewed at length on numerous occasions, and she quite happily tells the camera that this is her name and this is where she got the name. Just all sorts of questions really are raised. Just every moment that you watch this woman interviewed, your skin crawls and you perhaps think I'm being cruel given what she went through, but when you hear the story in its entirety you may be a little bit more scathing about Sherry yourself. So when Sherry went into foster care, her 2 siblings actually did go on to be adopted and did go on to hopefully live happy lives, but Sherry just went round and round in the care system until she reached the age of 18, and obviously then couldn't be in the care system as she was no longer considered a minor. So Sherry was kicked out of this care system, the only home really that she'd known since she was 4, and she became homeless. She was living on the streets. So she decides to go back and live with her abusive father. She's 18 at this stage and he goes right back to abusing her all over again. Even when Sherry actually got married and her husband lived with her and her father continued to abuse her and would actually kick Sherry's husband out of the marital bed so that he could get in that bed himself. So I think you'll sort of appreciate right from the get-go this is quite a dysfunctional family unit that we're looking at. So I think it's important to sort of get that background for Sherry to maybe give you an indication of how she was the person she was and the things that she would go on to do. Now, Sherry would actually go on to have 9 children of her own. She developed type 2 diabetes and was wheelchair bound. She also had extremely ulcerated feet which she could not walk on, which were always bandaged when we see her in the interviews. Again, that will be a point that comes up later, which is why I'm telling you now. So of Sherry's 9 children, 5 were actually taken away from her for sexual abuse. In 1981, her son Scotty, in 82, Joshua, in 85, Michael, in 86, Maria, and in 87, little Sherry, so she named a daughter after herself, and all of those children were taken from her. But Sherry would then go on to have a further 4 children, none of which were removed from her, even given her past and what she had went through and what she had put her 5 children through. She would go on to raise another 4 children in absolute squalor. She would neglect them. It was not a home for a child at all, but Sherry was allowed to keep her following 4 children. Now, this family are interviewed at length throughout the documentary, and really, if you can watch it without eye rolling, mouth hanging open, I applaud you. The family are just, let's just say this was a family where incest was a very common thing. Sherry herself would actually go on to have children with her cousin. Within the family were sleeping with family, and things that can go on to cause. I think when you see the family interviewed, you can tell that the apple hasn't fallen very far from the tree with most of the children. Obviously the children that are interviewed are now adults, so I'm not speaking ill of children here, but this family are just completely messed up. Sherry would actually go on to abuse all of the children that she had after the first 5 were taken away from her. She just continued that chain of sexual abuse that started with her father and herself. But she much preferred the girls. Her favourite child was Maria. Now Maria was actually taken away from Sherry at the age of 1 for, you guessed it, sexual abuse. She was taken to the ER to be examined and she was found to have vaginal tearing. Sherry had been abusing Maria. Now, for some inexplicable reason, the ER actually returned Maria to Sherry and asked her to take her to their GP, which obviously Sherry didn't do. But instead, Sherry actually gave Maria to her own mother. Now, this is her own mother who, again, when you see her interviewed, you won't believe what you're hearing. She knew about the abuse that her husband was putting her child through again, and she sat by and allowed that to happen. So Sherry gives Maria to her mother, Maria's grandmother, and the state then come and remove her from that household, thank the Lord. When Sherry's mother's actually interviewed, she actually says, but Sherry really loved Maria, she really loved that one, she even managed to keep her for a whole year. And she said that with complete sincerity, thinking that this was a massive feat and praising her daughter for managing to keep her child for a year. So that will give you a taster of what we're talking about here. Sherry continued to stay in the house with the rest of the children. What Child Protective Services were doing at this time, I have absolutely no idea. So when Maria was taken away from Sherry, Sherry very much had her eye out for a little girl, for a baby girl. And at that time, Vera was actually a baby and was living very close to Sherry. And Sherry actually approached Vera's mother and said, can I have your daughter? She wanted to take her daughter. Obviously, she says, no, you cannot. But when Vera got older, she was actually being sexually abused by her own father. So she moved out of the house. I would assume that her mother wasn't properly protecting her. She had serious issue with her mother, so she moved out of the household. Initially she moved in with an aunt, but very quickly Sherry stepped forward and offered her a home. Do you want to come and live with me? Now we have to remember here, Vera is maybe 20, but she very much has the mindset, has the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. She's very, very vulnerable. She's extremely easy to manipulate, but this is the exact kind of person that Sherry likes to have in her household, because as you will go on to see, she just likes to play the puppet master and manipulate everyone within that household for her own ends. So the question is, why would Sherry open her house to this adult? Obviously she wanted a little girl. Why was she opening the house to an adult female? I'm sure you can put one and one together and work out perhaps where we were going to go with this one. When Vera moved in with Sherry, she very quickly became not much more than a house slave to her. The small amount of money that Vera did have due to her intellectual issues, which she received state benefit for, this was actually all signed over to Sherry and she received all of Vera's money, so Vera had nothing that she wasn't given by Sherry. Now at the time in the household, just to tell you who all was living there, we have Sherry and her husband Kevin Sr. You will never meet more of a weary willy of a man, and by that I mean a coward, someone that sits back and knows what's happening and does nothing. He was, it seems, terrified of Sherry from everything I saw in this documentary, but in saying that, he was not a particularly nice person himself, so we will get onto that also. And also the other 4 children that were not taken away from Sherry: Punky, Zachary, Garth and Chucky. I will make no references to horror movies about little dolls, but there we are. So as I said, Vera very much became a slave in the household. She wasn't even allowed to speak unless she was given permission from Sherry. One of her jobs was to rub and bathe Sherry's feet, which, as I already said, were very swollen and ulcerated from her diabetes. But if Vera didn't do this correctly, Sherry would have a stick that she would use to hit Vera over the head with if she didn't perform the task to her satisfaction. Now, seeing from the lead of their mother, the sons all also treated Vera exactly the same way. They would hit her when they felt like it, they would torment her, they would abuse her. She was there pretty much just as a slave, as a plaything for the family. To give you an idea as to the sort of situation that they lived in, they also had a house pig, which was allowed to freely urinate and defecate anywhere it wanted in the house, and this pig slept in a closet, and Vera shared the closet with the pig. I would think that the pig was probably actually treated better than Vera was at this stage. And let's get this for irony, folks. The pig was actually removed from the Brooks family because the house was not deemed a suitable environment in which to keep an animal. This house that Sherry had her 4 kids and had Vera living in was not suitable for an animal to live in. So for that animal's own benefit, it was removed from the environment. It does seem that child services were actually called multiple times, so I would imagine that the neighbours did try to do something, but nothing happened because Vera was under such strong control of Sherry. When she was questioned, she would look to Sherry, "Can I answer?" She would claim that she loved Sherry, that she didn't want to move, that she wasn't being abused, that she was happy. But any qualified individual would very easily be able to see that she's undergoing coercion, that coercive control. They would have been able to see through what was happening. She would never speak when she wasn't in the room with Sherry. She was never taken aside to be interviewed out of Sherry's earshot, eyeshot. Sherry always had to be in the room when this happened, and Vera would not speak to authorities without first looking at Sherry to get permission to do so. So let's get on to the reason why Sherry actually took Vera in and offered her a home. I said before that she preyed on vulnerable people, Vera obviously being one, but she had a thing about little girls. So at this stage, Sherry decided that Vera should start a sexual relationship with her son, Zachary. Zachary was 14 at this stage, but she encouraged them to get together and they started a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. Vera would have been in her early 20s, as I said, Zachary was 14. Now Vera obviously cannot be blamed here. She does not have the mental capacity to realise that she is sleeping with a child. She very much, it seems, thought that Zachary was her boyfriend. She grew to love him. Zachary was just doing what his mother told him, and obviously he was getting to sleep with a woman into the bargain, so he just went along with things. The reason, obviously, that she encouraged them to get together and have a sexual relationship is that Sherry wanted a child. She wanted Vera to get pregnant and then she would take the child for herself, obviously at the whole time hoping that Sherry would go on to have a girl. So unfortunately for Vera, she would go on to get pregnant by Zachary, and more unfortunately for her, she would go on to have a little girl. The birth itself of this child is just staggering. Sherry's birthday was the 3rd of November. Now, the baby was actually due in December, but Sherry was determined that she wanted this baby to be born on her birthday. So she made Vera drink 3 bottles of castor oil. Now, this is an old wives' tale, and the actual recommended dose is 2 tablespoons, and it's actually supposed to cause spasms of the intestine. I think it's like a laxative is what it's meant to do. But it was also thought back in the day that the irritation of the intestines could irritate the womb and could make you go into early labour. So as I say, Vera is made to drink 3 bottles of castor oil, and it works. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the baby until the 4th of November, and Sherry, when interviewed, jokes very happily about this, about giving her the castor oil. "We almost succeeded, she almost came out on my birthday. Oh, well, baby just wanted to come out and have Thanksgiving dinner with her mama." Not referring to Vera, referring to herself. Sherry would actually go on to name Vera's child Willadine, and she would just assume control immediately and removed Willadine from her mother. Now, all of her kids, all of Sherry's kids, who were all teenagers or young men at this time, all told Willadine that Sherry was her mother. Vera was just treated like the house slave as usual. Her baby was taken from her, and Sherry went on to tell all her sons that she wanted them all to have had at least 1 child by the time they were 17. Obviously so that she could have more daughters, I suppose. A young lady called Gina Lopez, a 15-year-old, comes along and is in a relationship with Sherry's son Garth. Now again, she is taken into the family. Sherry says, "Oh, when are you going to give me a grandbaby?" This girl's 15, and unfortunately for her, she gets pregnant to Garth. Now she is interviewed in the documentary also, and she says that she was stalked by the brothers and by the mother. They would come and sit outside her work, they would treat her awfully, they would watch everything she was doing, everywhere she was going, and it really, I think she ended up losing her job actually due to this. Now, I am never going to say that it is a fortunate thing for someone to miscarry, but for Gina, she did miscarry, and she actually says herself that it's probably fortunate for herself and the baby that would have been that this happened, as that would have been another person under Sherry's house rules. Baby would have been taken off her. Goodness only knows what would have happened. That's not my personal opinion, obviously. I'm not getting into that sort of argument, but this is what Gina said, that she felt that that was meant to happen because what could have happened otherwise was just unthinkable. Thankfully for Gina, she reconnected with her mother, whom she'd had a falling out with, and she moved to Kentucky to be with her, so well away from the Brooks family. The Brooks family in the neighbourhood, it should be known, had quite the reputation for troublemakers. The sons, and even Sherry herself, felt that they were gang members. They called themselves Crips. There's loads of pictures of them doing all this. I don't know what is it? Is it? I have no idea. I'm old and I'm uncool, but really it just looks ridiculous. So they thought they were the big I am. They thought they were like the bad news in the neighbourhood, when really they were just all completely... Me calling them stupid is a compliment to them. That's how far we're going here. So now that I've given you a bit of background about the family, you know the situation, let's get on to what sadly happened to Vera. So it's January 21st, 2011, 2 p.m, and the police receive a call to come out, and they are very well versed in the Brooks. They recognise their voices on the phone by this stage. I don't think they ever come out hurriedly because this family are known for being troublemakers. There has been a disagreement of falling out between a cousin of the Brooks by the name of Danny Bixler and a neighbour from further up the road. So they're called out to attend to see what's happened. Now it should be noted that Danny Bixler, to give you an idea of the kind of person he is, he had just been released from prison 3 weeks prior, and already the police was being called out for a disturbance with fights with a neighbour. Also with Danny is 17-year-old Nicole Peters, his new girlfriend. They had been dating for 2 weeks, so he had been released from prison for a week and he'd got himself a new 17-year-old girlfriend. Obviously a quick mover, and obviously she doesn't have very high standards. Now I think they actually did meet. I think she had been serving time in a juvenile detention centre, so I think that's actually how they met. So that'll give you an idea as to what we're talking there as well. When the police actually attend, Vera is in the home and she looks in a right state. She has a broken nose, she has a split lip, she has bruising. She does not look very well at all. But again, when questioned in front of Sherry, she refuses to say that anything has happened to her. She says that she fell down the stairs. There's always a reason why she has these injuries. It's never down to being beaten on. And at this stage, Vera had undergone completely horrendous abuse. So Sherry, I think, realising that the state of Vera, it's not going to wash that she's fallen down again, actually concocts an individual. She makes up a supposed boyfriend of Vera's called Desmond Thompson that has done this to her and then just left, and they don't know much else about him. They also make a point of suggesting that he's African American, so we've obviously got racism running through this also. Why that's of any relevance, why they felt they needed to say that, who knows? But this was Vera's African American boyfriend, who none of them know where he is, where he went. He did it. Now Vera wasn't allowed to leave the house. She wasn't allowed a phone. She wasn't allowed to even speak without Sherry's permission. How and under God she was meant to have left the house with a boyfriend is anybody's guess. So back to what Danny is supposed to have done to the neighbour. So apparently he had pulled a knife on the neighbour, and the police were looking for him in regards to this. Now his girlfriend Nicole, 17-year-old Nicole, and Zachary, son of Sherry, also had warrants out for their arrest for a completely unrelated incident. All three were together and they decided to go to a friend's house, which was quite close to the railway line. So the police were looking for all three, Zachary, Nicole and Danny. Now Danny was from an area called Tiffin, and they actually went to Tiffin Park, where there was another young man on a swing. He asked this, well, probably not very politely, he asked him to get off so his girlfriend could get on, and when this youth refused to get off the swing, Danny beat him just until he was extremely badly injured. Obviously, after having done this, they were trying to get away from the police. They didn't want to be found, and that is how they ended up in Findlay, living with Sherry, who quite happily let them move in, even knowing everything that they had done. I think Sherry sort of saw the opportunity of having someone in the house. Now, Danny also had a teardrop tattoo, and we all know what that means. It denotes that he has killed someone. Whether or not he has, that was never actually stated. But I think Sherry saw the situation of these two young bad people, and they could perhaps take care of a problem that she felt that she had at that time. She now had the little girl, Willadine. She had no need for Vera anymore. Now also, to add, just to give you some context here, she was quite happy to let Danny stay in her house because she had previously dated Danny's father, her cousin. She even jokes in an interview, "They called us the kissing cousins," and she thinks that's funny. Sherry actually had a child with Danny's father, also called Danny, and his name was Scotty. He actually went on to be raised by his grandmother, who hopefully was a sensible person and got him out of the situation. But Sherry wasn't remotely bothered because he was male, and she didn't care. She wanted a little girl, she had a little boy, and it was taken off her, and she's like, oh well. Also, for context and just to add to the completely messed up situation of all of this, Danny Sr. actually in 2008 stabbed his wife's lover and ended up going on a high-speed police chase in a flatbed truck. I don't know how that's possible. And ended up going to prison, where he still was when this all happened in 2011. Now, I hope you're still following. I do apologise, this is really convoluted. There's so many different bits of information from different areas, and the order in which they go is quite confusing. So I'm going to go back to the day before Vera's murder. It is said that there were numerous reasons put forward for why they killed Vera. I'm going to try and explain what happened, different reasons. The reason this is so confusing is because Sherry lies so much, changes the story so much. We get so many different stories from so many different members of the family that getting the actual nuts and bolts of what actually happened is difficult. So, first of all, Vera was beaten by Zachary, Sherry's son, and the father of her child. Sherry tells Zachary that Vera has pushed Willadine into a coffee table, and Willadine's been hurt. Obviously, Vera didn't do this, but Zachary beats Vera quite badly for this, and then an aunt is brought into the room and is also asked to beat Vera, so that's what they do. So on the day before also, Danny Bixler puts a padlock on the end of a belt, a metal padlock, and he whips Vera with this around the face and body. The family all watch and no one intervenes. No one says stop, no one tries to get help. Everyone just sits there and watches. Danny's girlfriend Nicole, who's, as I said, 17, also joins in with the beating, but they take regular breaks to go upstairs and have sex, as it is said that Nicole was sexually aroused by the beating of Vera. And other people are all in the house watching this and what's happened. It's said that at that time 12 to 15 people lived in that house, and these people were all aware of what was going on. They were aware of how badly Vera was being beaten, yet nobody did anything to help her. So to show the audacity of this family, the day before the murder, the family did what they normally did at dinner time, and they went across the road to a local Salvation Army soup kitchen for dinner, and Vera went with them, and Vera was in an awful state, really badly injured, and two of the volunteers at the soup kitchen are interviewed in the documentary, and they do say that she looked like she'd been in a car wreck. She was a state. None of them saw fit to ask her if she was okay, none of them reported it, and they knew the people she was with, and they knew that the people she was with was bad news. And I would imagine that they probably knew that Vera was a vulnerable adult, but nobody did anything for her. That same day, the day before the murder, Vera was also stabbed, and Sherry actually says in the interview in the documentary that she remembers putting her finger in the wound to see how deep it was, and she shows the camera how deep it was. Again, Sherry knew everything that was happening because Sherry had orchestrated the whole thing, and I will get to what she had done and how she had manipulated them to do her bidding, to do what she asked. So she was beaten that whole day. She was taken out to the Salvation Army soup kitchen where she was seen and no one did anything. She was taken back home where they continued to abuse her. They stabbed her. The beating continued the next day. And at 9 p.m. they actually went into Scotty's bedroom. Scotty, if you remember, was Vera's child with Danny's father, Danny Sr., who had been raised by the grandmother. Now he was in the home. So they went into his room and they were discussing the murder. This is Zachary, Nicole, Danny and the other brother Garth, and they were planning the murder. They were planning what they were going to do. Scotty heard all of this, and at a later stage when questioned why did you not do anything, he said because he didn't think they'd go through with it. So they left with Vera that evening, intent on ending her life, and Vera must have known that something was going to happen because she cried and she didn't want to go. And she looked to Scotty, who she felt was not, that could have saved her, that he wasn't as bad as the others, and she looked to him to go with her. But when she asked Scotty to come with him, Zachary, the father of Willadine, said no, he's not coming. She also looked to Shannon, who was the girlfriend of Michael, another brother, and Shannon just completely ignored her. I'll get to Shannon at a later date. So as they left, Vera wasn't allowed to say goodbye to her daughter, Willadine, and the last person she spoke to as she left the house was Sherry. She said, "Good night, sugar babe," and that's the last words that she would speak to anyone within the house, hence the name of the documentary. 15 minutes later, Vera would be dead. So when they went out this evening, Danny was wearing a blue bandana and blue shorts, which were said to be because he was on Crip's business with killing Vera. Now, to explain why he was on Crip's business, the oldest brother, Punky, was actually dead. He was a Crips member, and apparently he was the only person that could keep Sherry, the mother, in line. She was actually afraid of Punky. Punky had been walking home one evening with his girlfriend in the dark along the side of a road when he'd been hit by a car and been killed. Now obviously the family were devastated, but Sherry actually concocted that Heather had pushed him in front of the car, which obviously had not happened. So Heather then received an extremely vicious beating from a member of the family because Sherry just decided to tell the entire town that Heather had murdered her son Punky. Now, one of the reasons that Sherry had managed to get people to turn against Vera, she was always telling stories like she pushed Willadine into the coffee table. She deliberately dropped a brick on my foot, which hadn't happened. It had been an accident, but she said Vera had done it on purpose. And she also then said that it wasn't Heather that had pushed Punky in front of the cab. It had been Vera. Vera wasn't even there. They had a little shrine in the house to Punky, and she would put like little things, little presents in the box, Sherry, and someone had put a bar of chocolate in. Vera was starving, she hadn't enough to eat, and she ate the bar of chocolate. Now, by eating the bar of chocolate, this was seen to be disrespect to Punky and a reason she must die. So it was already being planned for days, for months prior, and it's said that Vera actually overheard the plot and she knew they wanted to kill her, which was why she didn't want to leave the house. Because Punky had been a Crip, this is why Danny was wearing the blue bandana and blue shorts on Crip's business to avenge a friend. Zachary also, that was obviously his big brother, so he was along for the ride. The whole family, no one helped, not the girlfriends of the brothers, not Scotty, who obviously was a cousin, but he wasn't one of the brothers. Sherry was just winding everyone up around her merry little tune to try and get everyone on side to think Vera was evil. Meanwhile, Vera is just a house slave, being beaten, being tortured, just tormented. She couldn't leave because Sherry had got custody of her child and she had all her money, so she was stuck there. And I don't think even if she thought she could have left, she would have had the mental capacity to do that. Another thing that was actually concocted is that Sherry said that Vera had sprayed mace in the house, which had caused Shannon, her son's girlfriend, to miscarry when she was pregnant. Now, in the documentary, Shannon is interviewed and she denies ever having been pregnant. She says, well, no, that didn't happen because I wasn't pregnant. But it showed screenshots of her Facebook where she states that she's just found out she's pregnant. So Vera is blamed for pushing Punky in front of the car. She took the chocolate bar, which disrespected Punky. She pushed Willadine into a coffee table, She caused Shannon's miscarriage by spraying pepper spray in the house. The only one of those things that she actually did was took the chocolate bar, and that was because she was starving. So all of these things are whipped together, and Sherry tells all the family, and they plan to do away with Vera. She has allowed Danny and his girlfriend Nicole to move in, who are bad news, and she knows that they will carry out her plan for her, and of course they fall straight into the trap. They leave with Vera that night at 9 PM. Vera knows what's going to happen. Sadly, she knows. They take her, they beat her extremely badly, they stab her, but then they strip her and stab her some more, and they attempt to cut her throat, and they leave her on the railway line, hoping that obviously the train will hit her, decapitate her, and they'll never know that they're at fault. Now they get this idea because one of their relatives had actually died on that railway line. So 16-year-old Travis Paquette had actually been hit by a train. I think they said he was out skateboarding and he got past one train, but another train had been coming behind it and he was hit and killed. Now how Sherry delicately puts this is that he was left like hamburger meat. The reason that they put Vera on the track was because they thought that it would turn her into hamburger meat and cover her crimes. They also, when questioned why would they remove her clothing, Sherry stated, well, probably because the knife was too blunt to go through the clothing when they were trying to stab her, and she's doing stabbing actions as she's being interviewed. Now, Sherry would only have known that if she had actually witnessed that happening at an earlier date. So poor Vera is taken, beaten for days, but beaten to death, stabbed, and they attempt to cut her throat to such a stage from ear to ear that she's almost decapitated. They put her on the railway line, but Vera is not dead. She manages to get herself off the railway line and into the gap between the two lines. So when the train comes, there is a 13-inch clearance, and the train actually goes straight over her and doesn't touch her, so all evidence is intact. The train driver did see something and thought it was a baby deer. Unfortunately, as you may have guessed, Vera didn't make it. Vera did pass, but that final act of her managing to get her body off the track and in between with the clearance of the train meant that all evidence was intact for prosecution. After committing the murder, Danny, Nicole and Zachary would go and party with their pals, and apparently Danny and Nicole were very excited. They were almost high on what they had done, and they told people at the party what they had done, and some of those people at the party were interviewed, and it seems very much that they either didn't believe them or they just didn't care. Zachary was said to be quite moody. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He was said to be quite, thinking about what he had done. Did he have any sort of conscience? I'm not sure, but that to me is completely irrelevant. What he did is what he did. Whether he felt bad or good about it afterwards doesn't really remove what he did. Obviously Sherry's interviewed and she pleads complete ignorance, but she does say that she saw Danny with a knife. The knife that was used to kill Vera was a kitchen knife from the Brooks house, and she had seen Danny play with it in the kitchen that evening, and she did know that he had taken it with him when he had left with Vera. But the rest of the family said that Sherry very quickly got a cover story in order to tell everyone, so that when the police asked what happened, that she could tell them. Now, if she had no knowledge of what was happening, why would she need a cover story? The cover story was that Vera had left with her 60-year-old homeless boyfriend. There was a 60-year-old homeless man in the local area, and they blamed it on him basically, and said that Vera had been left with him. Why they thought that would have been believed is anyone's guess. So the morning after the murder, the morning after Vera died, Sherry actually calls Child Protective Services and requests that Zachary, her son, and Willadine's father actually receives full custody of Willadine. Thankfully this request was denied and Willadine was put up for adoption, thank God. Zachary was granted supervised visits, and the first supervised visit, Willadine just screamed the entire time and wouldn't go near him. That little girl sounds like she's got her head screwed on just right. And in the second visit that he was due to show up for, he didn't show, and he did cite the reason he didn't show is because Willadine just screamed the place down and wouldn't come near me first time, so he didn't show up, and he lost all parental rights, which is awesome. Hopefully little Willadine is in a different place. Hopefully she has no memory of any of this, because she was very, very young when all this happened. So hopefully she will go on to have a decent life, and the cycle will be completely broken of this dysfunctional, just messed up family. So Bixler did try to deny the murder, but he eventually was arrested, and he did, after questioning, admit where he threw the murder weapon, that knife that was taken from the Brooks kitchen. Nicole also implicated herself, so only them two were arrested. Sherry, Zachary, Michael, Shannon and Chuck all lied to the police, and they were actually all charged with obstructing justice. So when Danny and Nicole were charged, Sherry changed her story again and said she was only an innocent bystander, and she couldn't get to a phone to call the police to tell them what was happening. Shannon was in the house at that time. This is Shannon, who apparently miscarried the baby that she wasn't pregnant with, but she said on Facebook she was pregnant. She had a cell phone and she was in the house at the time. And she says, oh, I wish I'd called the police, but I had no minutes left on my phone. But then at a later stage said that she did realise that she didn't need minutes to call emergency services. So this family just can't tell the truth if it's looking them in the face, to be honest. So how were they sentenced? I've got them written down here, so forgive me for looking off to the side. Danny got 40 years for first-degree murder.
3 weeks when he took Vera Jo's life. He was unable to make it a month out of prison before committing these new felony offenses. And Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to read a letter that was found in Vera Jo's purse after she was murdered. The officer went through her things, and in her purse was found a letter, and this is what it says. It says, I love you, Willadine. You are a good little baby girl to us. I'm glad to be your mommy, and I'm glad that I had you on November 4th at 4:16 a.m. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, 19 inches long. Mommy loves you. It's telling that she wrote that letter. It's dated at about when Willadine was 2 months old. She wrote that and carried it in her purse for well over a year.
The defendant's record reveals that he is a substantial risk of reoffending. There's an old adage, past is prologue, and I believe that to be true in this particular case. It's important the defendant be adequately punished, because I believe that if he were not, it is likely he'll reoffend and reoffend in a violent fashion. Therefore, as to count 1, the charge of murder, the court's going to impose a sentence of life with eligibility for parole only after the expiration of 30 years.
Nicole got 23 years on a plea deal. They reduced the murder charge to a conspiracy charge. She stated Sherry, Shannon, Danny, Zach, Garth and herself had agreed to kill her because of Shannon's miscarriage.
Daniel Bixler, Shannon Brooks, Zachary Brooks, Garth Brooks, Sherry Brooks and I agreed to kill Vera Jo Reigel on March 26, 2011. We agreed to do this because Shannon Brooks said Vera Jo Reigel caused her to miscarry. Zachary Brooks got a knife and gave it to Daniel Bixler. Daniel Bixler and I made Vera leave with us. We walked Vera to the railroad tracks where Daniel stabbed her several times. Afterward, Daniel and I agreed to throw the knife in the river. All of this happened in Findlay, Hancock County, Ohio.
The accusation that it was the Brooks plan and them to do all this, where's the charges? Why are they not in prison? Why are they not where Nikki and Danny are going? I want to know. If she and Daniel are making these allegations, then why are they not in prison?
We believe Nicole should get the maximum sentence the law can give to her. Plus, Vera Jo has a little girl now. That little girl has to grow up without her mother.
I know no amount of I'm sorry will justify or bring Vera back. But this is me making amends and taking responsibility for my actions. And again, I am truly sorry.
Zachary got 4 years, was charged with obstruction for this case, but was never actually charged with the beatings or the torturing about Vera. Danny had actually even said that Sherry had offered him money to kill Vera and had been trying to get him to kill Vera for some time. But Sherry seems to have got off with this completely scot-free because of her physical. She's in a wheelchair, she has diabetes, so can't go to prison, it seems. So Sherry actually ended up receiving 120 days in prison, which was suspended.
I just want to say that very depressed the last 7 months since Vera Jo's been gone. I'm very sorry for what my cousin did. It's been stressful to me. I miss her. That's it.
Very well. The court has now heard from the state of Ohio, from Mr. Johnson, from Ms. Brooks, and from the probation department relative to this decision. The court will proceed then to impose sentence at this time.
I don't want people talking bad about me because it wasn't my fault. I miss Vera. I miss Vera very deeply. Vera was my family. I'm sorry for what my cousin Danny did to her. I live with the grief every day and cry for Vera. Nobody sees my tears for her. Everybody thinks bad of me and thinks that I didn't care for her. But I cared for Vera very deeply.
It does say later that in 2015 she was convicted on a drug trafficking charge. Michael Brooks, another son and the boyfriend or husband of Sherry, he got 30 days in prison. Now obviously all these people knew what was happening and all planned this, so 30 days in prison. It also has to be said that Kevin Brooks, Sherry's husband, was aware of what was going to happen. He was due to go to prison on an unrelated charge and serve 30 days. He actually asked them, if you're going to kill her, wait until I'm in prison so that I've got an alibi. So that will tell you just the convoluted nature of this case and the fact that every member of that family knew in some regard and no one did anything to help her. When police came, she was not removed from Sherry. She was not interviewed on her own. Neighbours were said to have made reports, nothing came of them. The police didn't even file most of the reports of the complaints. A teacher at Vera's school actually said Vera was too kind, she was actually too willing to please to her own detriment, which obviously we know to be true now. So this poor girl died because Sherry didn't want her anymore, because she had the little baby girl she wanted, Willadine. Zachary didn't want her as a girlfriend anymore. He'd started seeing other girls and just wanted rid of Vera. He just had no use for her. And to do this, they concocted the story about her killing Punky, the story about her being responsible for the miscarriage of Shannon, her taking the chocolate bar was blatant disrespect, and her pushing her own daughter into a coffee table. And Sherry managed to manipulate the whole stupid bunch of them into killing this poor innocent girl, so she could have ownership of Willadine, which ended up not happening anyway, thankfully. But this woman is repugnant. This woman's family are repugnant, and this documentary is one of the most shocking I have ever watched. You just will watch these interviews and you will not be able to believe what these people are saying and what these people feel is appropriate for them to say. It's just staggering. It's staggering. It's disgusting. And that poor young woman, it just lost her life for no reason. A group called Voices for Vera was actually formed in the area by local members of the community to try to get justice for Vera and to have the Brooks family properly prosecuted, but as yet nothing further has happened. So that is the story of the killing of Vera Jo Reigel. Good night, Sugar Babe. The documentary is available to watch on Amazon Prime and was written and directed by David Miles. It's a very good watch, it's a riveting watch, it's a shocking and disturbing watch. I would very much recommend it if you're interested in the case. Thank you for listening to Vera's story. I'd love to hear your thoughts below in the comments. Do you feel that Sherry somehow has got excuse due to her upbringing and her abuse as a child? But do you feel that should have made her more of a loving, caring person, not wanting to put someone through? But we've heard stories about the cycle of abuse continuing. What are your thoughts on this case? Let me know below in the comments. Thanks for listening. Over and out from Lisa Lives.